The air in the department store was thick with the scent of cinnamon and manufactured cheer, a cloying combination that clung to the back of Julian Croft's throat. Carols, tinny and relentless, bled from hidden speakers, weaving a soundtrack of joy that felt like a personal insult. He stood before a towering, fake-frosted Christmas tree, its baubles shimmering under the aggressive commercial lighting. Around him, families swirled in a chaotic ballet of excitement. Children with sticky hands pointed at everything. Parents juggled shopping bags and strollers, their laughter echoing in the vast, vaulted space. Julian felt like a ghost, observing a world to which he no longer belonged. He adjusted the collar of his tailored cashmere coat, a shield against the warmth of the crowd and the chill that lived permanently inside him. He was here for a perfunctory task, a gift for a board member, something expensive and impersonal that would fulfill a social obligation and be forgotten by New Year's. His gaze drifted past the glitter and landed on a window display to his left. It was a miniature alpine village, complete with tiny chalets puffing cotton ball smoke and skaters gliding on a mirror pond. Circling it all was an electric train, a magnificent old-fashioned steam engine with polished brass fittings and a line of crimson passenger cars. His breath hitched. For a moment the store melted away, the noise faded to a dull roar, and he was 5 years in the past. He saw a small hand, chubby and determined, pushing a wooden train along a track laid out on their living room floor. He heard a squeal of pure delight, a sound so clear it physically ached in his chest. "Faster, Daddy, the train is late for Christmas." Thomas, his son. The memory was a shard of glass in his heart, twisting with a familiar, searing pain. He instinctively touched the cool, smooth platinum of the wedding band he still wore, a relic of a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else. He had lost them both, his wife, Sarah, and their son, Thomas, in a flurry of screeching tires and shattering glass on a slick December road. Since then, Christmas wasn't a season. It was a sentence, a brutal annual reminder of the silence in his sprawling penthouse, of the unopened presents from that last year still tucked away in a closet, monuments to a future that never arrived. He turned away from the window, the movement stiff, his expression hardening back into the unreadable mask of the CEO. He needed to get this done. He needed to leave. As he moved toward the luxury goods section, another scene caught his eye. A small pocket of reality amidst the curated fantasy. A woman knelt on the polished floor, her back to him. Her coat was simple, a practical dark wool, neat but showing the subtle signs of wear at the cuffs. She was holding the hands of a small boy, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, who was vibrating with an energy that seemed powerful enough to light the entire store. "But Mommy, look!" The boy's voice was a high, clear bell of pure wonder. He was pointing at a wall of garishly colored boxes, each promising worlds of adventure with plastic heroes and elaborate playsets. "I see it, Leo." The woman's voice was gentle, a soft melody laced with a thread of exhaustion Julian recognized from a great distance. She smoothed the boy's hair, a gesture of such profound and automatic love that it felt like another blow. They were a stark contrast to his own cold solitude. Their connection was a palpable thing, a bubble of warmth in the refrigerated air of the store. He watched as she spoke to the boy in a low murmur, her face a mixture of adoration and a deep, quiet worry that she tried to hide. The boy's shoulders slumped just a little, a flicker of disappointment crossing his bright, open face, before he nodded, accepting her words with the simple trust of a child. She led him away from the main thoroughfare toward a quieter, less trafficked corridor that ran along the side of the building, a service hallway of sorts that shoppers sometimes used as a shortcut. Julian found himself moving in the same direction, not consciously following them, but seeking the same escape from the oppressive cheer. The noise of the crowd receded, replaced by the low hum of the building's ventilation. The lighting here was dimmer, more functional. It was a space between spaces, forgotten and plain. He saw them stopped near a fire exit, partially obscured by a large potted plant that had seen better days. The woman, Elara, had crouched down again to be at eye level with her son. She thought they were alone. Julian paused in the shadows, not wanting to intrude, but somehow unable to make himself turn and walk away. He could hear her voice, fragile and strained, trying so hard to be steady. "Sweetheart, you know how much I love you, right?" she began, her thumb stroking his cheek. Leo nodded, his big, brown eyes fixed on her face. "And you know that Santa is very, very busy this year. He has so many children to visit." A knot formed in Julian's stomach. He knew what was coming. He saw her swallow hard, her own eyes glistening under the fluorescent lights. Sometimes Santa's sleigh is too full. Sometimes he can't make it to every house with a big sack of toys. Her voice cracked on the last word, a tiny, crystalline sound of failure and apology. She took a shaky breath and delivered the final, devastating blow to a child's magical world. "I'm so sorry, baby, but I think there will be no gifts this year, son." She wasn't just talking to the boy. She was weeping, silent tears tracking paths down her cheeks as she pulled her son into a fierce hug, burying her face in his small shoulder to stifle a sob. The words and the raw, unvarnished pain behind them struck Julian with the force of a physical impact. It cut through the layers of carefully constructed apathy he had spent 5 years building. This was not the polite, manageable sadness of boardroom condolences. This was real. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking because she couldn't give her child a simple joy. He remained frozen in the shadows, an unwilling witness to this deeply private moment of sorrow. He should leave. He should grant them their privacy. But his feet felt nailed to the floor. Leo pulled back from the hug, his small face a canvas of confusion. He patted his mother's arm gently. "It's okay, Mommy. Don't cry. Santa is just tired." His simple, profound acceptance was more heartbreaking than any tantrum could have been. Then the boy's gaze shifted, his eyes wide and curious, found Julian standing in the dimness. There was no fear in his look, only an open, guileless inquiry. Before his mother could react, Leo let go of her hand and took 2 small steps toward the stranger in the expensive coat. He held up a small, worn plastic dinosaur clutched tightly in his fist. "Are you sad too?" Leo asked, his voice clear and direct. "Mommy is sad about Santa." The question was a key, turning in a lock Julian had forgotten existed. It bypassed the CEO, the grieving husband, the empty shell of a man, and spoke directly to the human being buried underneath. A child, seeing 2 sad adults, had simply connected the dots. Julian couldn't find his voice. He could command a room of 1,000 investors, but he had no answer for this small boy with a plastic dinosaur. Elara gasped, her head snapping up. Mortification washed over her face as she saw Julian. She scrambled to her feet, rushing forward and scooping Leo's hand into her own. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered, her cheeks flushed with a mixture of shame and panic. "Leo, you must not bother people. I'm so sorry." She began to pull her son away, ready to flee the scene of her humiliation. "Wait." The word came out of Julian's mouth before he'd even thought it. It was raspy, unused in this gentler context. Elara froze, her back still to him. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to step out of the shadows and into the unforgiving light. "He wasn't bothering me." He looked down at Leo, who was still watching him with that same unnerving, innocent intensity. An impulse, foreign and illogical, rose up within him. It was a desire to fix this one small, broken thing in a world he could no longer mend, a need to erase the tears from the mother's face and the quiet resignation from the boy's. "It's cold," Julian said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. "The store has a cafe. Would you let me buy you both a hot chocolate?" Elara turned slowly, her expression a whirlwind of suspicion, pride, and confusion. She looked at his coat, his polished shoes, his expensive watch, and then into his eyes. She saw the hard lines of a powerful man, but underneath, for just a second, she saw the same flicker of sadness her son had identified. "We couldn't possibly," she began, the refusal automatic. No, but then, Leo, ever the diplomat, chimed in. Hot chocolate has marshmallows, Mommy. Julian saw the battle on her face, the instinct to protect her son from a stranger, the pride that forbade her from accepting charity, and the simple, bone-deep weariness of a mother who wanted to give her child one small treat. Please, Julian said again, and the word held a weight he hadn't intended. I insist. He wasn't sure who he was pleading with or what for. Maybe he just didn't want to be alone with the ghost of a toy train a moment longer. After a long, silent moment, Elara gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The cafe was tucked away on the third floor, a quiet oasis of warm wood and soft lighting, far removed from the frantic energy of the main shopping areas. The scent of coffee and pastries replaced the artificial pine and cinnamon. They found a small table in a corner, next to a large window that looked out over the city lights, which were just beginning to glitter in the deepening twilight. The silence between them was thick and awkward as they waited for their drinks. Elara clutched her worn handbag in her lap, a sentry guarding her composure. Julian sat stiffly, his hands resting on the table, feeling utterly out of his depth. He hadn't sat in a public cafe with anyone other than a business associate in 5 years. He had forgotten the rhythm of it, the simple act of sharing a space. It was Leo who, once again, broke the tension. Their hot chocolates arrived in large, cheerful mugs, each topped with a mountain of whipped cream and a dusting of cocoa. Leo's eyes went wide with delight. "It's a snow mountain," he declared, before plunging his spoon in with gusto. A small dab of whipped cream landed on the tip of his nose. Elara instinctively reached out with a napkin, her movements fluid and full of grace. "Leo, careful." She dabbed his nose, a small, intimate gesture of care. A ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. It felt like an unfamiliar muscle stretching after years of disuse. "Thank you for this, mister," Elara began, her voice hesitant. "Julian," he supplied. "Just Julian." "I'm Elara, and this is my chief adventurer, Leo." Leo, hearing his title, looked up from his mug, a chocolatey mustache now adorning his upper lip. "I'm going to be an astronaut," he announced to Julian with grave importance. "And I'm going to fly to the moon and bring back a moon rock for my mom." "That's a very important mission," Julian found himself saying, his voice surprisingly steady. He was speaking to a child. It had been so long. He remembered reading bedtime stories about planets and stars to Thomas, his own small boy's head nestled in the crook of his arm. The memory was sharp, but for the first time it didn't just bring pain. It brought a faint, bittersweet warmth. "You'll need a powerful rocket," Julian added, playing along. Leo's eyes lit up. "A super-fast one, with fire coming out the back." Elara watched the exchange, her initial wariness softening slightly. She saw this imposing, wealthy man engaging with her son with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his stern exterior. She saw the sadness in his eyes again. But now it looked less like a warning and more like a wound. "I'm sorry again for what you overheard," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to her own mug. "It was a private conversation. I didn't think anyone was there." "There's nothing to apologize for," Julian said, his tone direct. "You were being a mother." The simplicity of his statement, devoid of pity or judgment, caught her off guard. She risked a glance at him. "It's been a difficult year. My hours were cut at the diner. I'm a waitress. Or, I was. Now I just get a few shifts a week. It's hard to find something steady that works around Leo's school schedule." She hadn't meant to say so much. The words just tumbled out, a confession born of exhaustion and the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Julian didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He just listened, his gaze steady and focused. He nodded slowly. "I understand." And the strange thing was, she felt that he did. They sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, sipping their drinks, the city lights painting patterns on the tabletop. Leo, having conquered his snow mountain, was now quietly drawing on a napkin with a crayon he'd produced from his pocket. "What do you want for Christmas?" Julian asked him, his voice soft. Leo looked up, his eyes serious. He glanced at his mother, a silent question passing between them. Elara gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head, her pride a fierce, protective thing. Leo seemed to understand. He turned back to Julian. "I want Mommy to not be sad anymore," he said. The air left Julian's lungs in a silent rush. Of all the things the boy could have said, a toy, a game, a bike, he had chosen that. He had wished for his mother's happiness. Julian looked at Elara, whose face had crumpled with a love so fierce it was painful to witness. She blinked back, fresh tears, reaching out to squeeze her son's shoulder. In that moment, Julian made a decision. It wasn't logical. It wasn't born of strategy or financial calculation. It was a purely emotional, gut-level response to the profound innocence of a child's wish and a mother's quiet desperation. He would not let this stand. He would not let this small beacon of warmth be extinguished by the cold realities of the world. As they prepared to leave, he handed Elara his business card. The heavy embossed cardstock felt foreign in her hand. Julian Croft, CEO, Croft Innovations. "If you need anything," he said, the words feeling inadequate. "Anything at all. Please call." She nodded, tucking the card into her purse as if it were a dangerous object. "Thank you, Julian. For the hot chocolate." He watched them walk away, the small boy's hand tucked securely in his mother's. He stayed at the window long after they were gone, watching the endless stream of traffic below. The toy train in the display downstairs was no longer just a symbol of his past. It was now tied to a small boy who wanted a moon rock for his mother. And sleep did not come easily that night. Julian lay in his vast, silent bed, the city a glittering tapestry of indifferent lights beyond his floor-to-ceiling windows. The emptiness of the penthouse felt more acute than ever. The silence was not peaceful. It was a roaring void, filled with the echoes of a child's wish and a mother's muffled sob. He got up and walked through the dark, cavernous space. His bare feet made no sound on the polished marble floors. He passed a closed door. Thomas's room. He hadn't opened it in 5 years. It remained exactly as his son had left it. A perfect, heartbreaking time capsule. Tonight, the urge to open it was a physical pressure in his chest, but he couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he went to his office, a sleek, minimalist room overlooking the heart of the city. He sat in the dark, the glow of his monitor, the only light. He pulled up the department store's website. He found the toy section. He found the train set. He added it to his cart. Then he found the astronaut action figure and the rocket ship playset and the building blocks, the art supplies, the books about dinosaurs and distant galaxies. He kept adding things, not with manic glee, but with a quiet, focused intensity. Each item was a small act of rebellion against the crushing weight of his own grief. Each toy was a stone being pulled from the wall he'd built around his heart. He was not just buying gifts for a little boy. He was buying back a piece of a feeling he thought was lost to him forever. The simple, uncomplicated joy of making a child happy. He used his corporate account and his highest-level contacts, a few discreet calls to the store manager, a quiet inquiry through his security team, to find an address, pulling strings he usually reserved for hostile takeovers and multi-billion-dollar deals. By dawn, a plan was in motion. The next morning, Elara woke to a strange sound, a soft thud, then another, coming from her living room. Her apartment was small, the walls thin. She slipped out of bed, her heart pounding with a familiar, low-grade anxiety. Had the landlord left another notice? She crept to the doorway of her living room and froze. The room was full. Where her threadbare rug and wobbly coffee table had been, there now stood a mountain of brightly wrapped presents. Boxes of every shape and size were stacked almost to the ceiling. A vibrant, impossible forest of color and ribbon. On the floor, fully assembled and waiting, was a magnificent electric train set, its tracks winding through the landscape of gifts. Her mind couldn't process it. She thought she was still dreaming. She took a tentative step into the room, her hand outstretched, and touched one of the boxes. It was real. "Mommy, what is it?" Leo stood behind her, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, his small dinosaur clutched in his hand. His gaze fell upon the scene, and his jaw dropped. He didn't shout or scream. He was silent, his eyes wide with a reverence usually reserved for miracles. He walked slowly toward the train set, his steps hesitant, as if he feared it might all vanish in a puff of smoke. He reached out a small, trembling finger and touched the engine. "Santa came," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. He wasn't too tired after all. Elara felt a wave of dizziness. This was impossible. Who? How? And then she remembered. The quiet man with the sad eyes, the heavy, expensive business card in her purse, Julian Croft, CEO. A storm of emotions crashed over her, awe, confusion, gratitude, and a hot, fierce wave of anger. How dare he? How dare he swoop in with his unimaginable wealth and throw it at her life like this? This wasn't a gift. It was a spectacle. It was charity on a scale so grand, it felt like an indictment of her own failure. She watched her son, who was now kneeling by the train, his face a perfect picture of bliss, and her anger began to dissolve, replaced by a profound, aching gratitude that brought tears to her eyes. She was torn. She had to see him. She had to understand. The Croft Innovations Tower was a shard of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Its lobby was an immense, echoing cathedral of marble and minimalist art designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. It worked. Elara, dressed in her best but still woefully inadequate coat, felt like a sparrow that had accidentally flown into a palace. She clutched her purse strap, the business card a talisman in her pocket. The receptionist, a woman with a sleek haircut and an air of bored indifference, looked her up and down. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying that she very much doubted it. "I'm here to see Julian Croft," Elara said, her voice smaller than she'd intended. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but—" "Mr. Croft does not see anyone without an appointment." The dismissal was swift and final. Elara's resolve hardened. "Please," she said, her voice gaining strength, "just tell him Elara is here. He'll know." The receptionist sighed, a put-upon sound, and tapped a few keys. She spoke quietly into her headset, her eyes still on Elara, full of skepticism. Then her expression shifted, a flicker of surprise, then deference. "He'll see you," she said, her tone completely changed. "Top floor, the elevator on the right." The ride up was a silent, stomach-lurching ascent. Julian's office was larger than her entire apartment. One entire wall was a window with a god's-eye view of the city. He was standing by that window when she entered, his back to her, looking out at his kingdom. He turned slowly. He looked tired, but the deep-seated sadness in his eyes seemed less. There was a flicker of something else there. Anticipation, maybe even hope. "You came," he said. It wasn't a question. "Did you really think I wouldn't?" She shot back, her carefully rehearsed anger bubbling to the surface. She strode into the room. "My living room, it's a toy store. How could you do that?" "Is he happy?" Julian asked, his voice quiet, cutting through her tirade. The question disarmed her. She faltered. He's ecstatic. He thinks Santa made a special trip, but that's not the point. You can't just do that with strangers. I can't accept it." "Why not?" "Because it's charity. Because it makes me feel like a project, something for a rich man to fix, to make himself feel better about the holidays." Her voice was shaking now, the anger giving way to the hurt and humiliation underneath. Julian walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. His face was open, vulnerable, in a way she had not expected. It wasn't about you," he said, his voice raw. "Not really. It was about me." He gestured to a small, silver-framed photo on his expansive desk. She hadn't noticed it before. It was a picture of him, younger and smiling. with a beautiful woman and a small boy who looked remarkably like Leo. The boy was holding a toy train. "My son Thomas," Julian said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "He loved trains. He loved Christmas more than anything." He finally told her the whole story, the accident, the silence, the 5 years of empty holidays and hollowed-out existence. "Last night," he continued, his gaze distant, "buying those toys for Leo, it was the first time since the accident that I felt like I was participating in Christmas instead of just surviving it. It was the first time I felt like a father again, even for a moment." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for understanding. "It was a selfish act, Elara. The gift was for me." The anger drained out of her completely, replaced by a wave of profound empathy. She saw him then, not as a powerful CEO, but as a man drowning in grief who had found a momentary piece of driftwood in the form of her son's happiness. She took a step closer. "My husband," she said, her own confession coming softly, "left when Leo was a baby. He said he wasn't ready for the responsibility." She had never told anyone that. "So for 5 years it's just been us, and I've tried so hard to be enough, to be both parents, and sometimes I feel like I'm failing." They stood there, in the opulent office, high above the city, two lonely souls, stripped bare by their shared confessions. They were no longer a rich man and a poor woman. They were a grieving father and a struggling mother, finding a strange and unexpected solace in each other's pain. A tentative routine began to form, delicate and unplanned. It started with a phone call from Julian a few days later. "I was wondering," he'd said, his voice hesitant, "if Leo might want to see the penguins at the aquarium." That first outing was filled with a gentle awkwardness. Julian seemed to be relearning a language he hadn't spoken in years, the language of laughter, of small talk, of simply being present. He watched, mesmerized, as Leo pressed his face against the glass of the penguin enclosure, chattering away to the birds as they torpedoed through the water. He saw the way Elara watched her son, her love a quiet, steady flame. After the aquarium, they had pizza at a noisy, family-friendly restaurant. Julian, who usually dined in hushed establishments where the plates cost more than Elara's weekly grocery budget, found himself enjoying the chaos. He helped Leo build a tower out of sugar packets and didn't even flinch when the boy spilled soda on his expensive trousers. He was changing. The hard edges of his grief were softening, worn down by the persistent, joyful presence of this small boy and his kind mother. His sterile penthouse, once a fortress of solitude, began to see visitors. Elara and Leo came over for a movie night. Leo, exploring the vast apartment, discovered the closed door to Thomas's room. "What's in here?" he asked, his hand on the doorknob. Julian froze. Elara quickly intervened. "Leo, honey, that's a private room." But Julian found his voice. "It's okay." He walked over and, for the first time in 5 years, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was pristine, a museum of a childhood interrupted. A spaceship mobile hung over the bed, books were neatly stacked on a shelf, and on the floor, a wooden train track was laid out. A train stopped mid-journey. Leo walked in, his eyes wide with wonder. He didn't touch anything. He just looked. "Whose room was this?" he asked softly. "It belonged to my son," Julian said, the words coming out more easily than he'd expected. "His name was Thomas." "He's in the stars now, right?" Leo asked, looking up at the spaceship mobile. "Like in my book." Julian felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded. "Yes, he's in the stars." Elara stood in the doorway, her hand over her heart, tears welling in her eyes. She was witnessing a healing she never could have imagined. That night, after he'd driven them home, Julian went back into Thomas's room. He sat on the edge of the small bed and picked up a well-loved teddy bear. He didn't weep. He just sat, breathing in the faint, lingering scent of a life that was gone, and for the first time it felt less like a tomb and more like a memory. He was letting the light in. He was letting Elara and Leo in. The true test came a week before Christmas. It was the annual Croft Innovations Holiday Gala, a lavish affair held in the grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel. It was an event Julian had always dreaded, a performance of corporate cheer that felt hollow and false. This year, he did something unthinkable. He invited Elara and Leo. Elara was hesitant. "Julian, I don't belong in that world. I don't have anything to wear." He'd simply smiled. "Let me take care of that." A dress appeared at her apartment the next day, a simple, elegant gown of deep emerald green that made her look like a queen. For Leo, a tiny, perfectly tailored suit. When he saw them that night, his breath caught in his throat. Elara was radiant, her quiet beauty shining brighter than any of the diamond-clad society wives in the room. And Leo looked impossibly small and dapper, his eyes wide as he took in the glittering chandeliers and the towering Christmas tree. Their arrival caused a stir. Whispers followed them as Julian guided them through the crowd. He ignored them, his focus entirely on making Elara and Leo feel comfortable. He introduced them simply as "my dear friends, Elara and Leo." But the whispers grew louder. The trigger came in the form of Mark Renshaw, a sharp-tongued board member who had always viewed Julian's grief as a business liability. He cornered Julian while Elara was getting a glass of punch for Leo. Well, Julian," Renshaw said with a smug, knowing smile. "I see you finally decided to move on. Finding a replacement family already." He glanced over at Elara, his gaze dismissive and insulting. "And so, quickly, she's certainly a departure from Sarah." The words were poison darts, each one dipped in the venom of Julian's deepest fears. Replacement family. The phrase echoed in his head, monstrous and accusatory. Was that what this was? Was he trying to slot this woman and her child into the gaping hole left by Sarah and Thomas? Was his newfound happiness a betrayal, a desecration of their memory? The ballroom suddenly felt suffocating. The laughter and music grated on his nerves. The warmth he had been feeling for weeks was extinguished, replaced by the familiar, icy grip of panic and guilt. He looked over at Elara, and for a terrifying moment, he didn't see her. He saw a reminder of what he had lost and what he was terrified of losing again. The old walls, the ones he had so carefully constructed, slammed back into place. He became cold, distant. He made a curt excuse and led them out of the party. The ride home shrouded in a thick, unbearable silence. When he dropped them off, he didn't get out of the car. "I'll call you," he said, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on the street ahead. But he didn't call. The next day, his calls went straight to voicemail. And the day after that, Elara was heartbroken. She felt a fool. She had allowed herself to believe. She had opened her heart and her son's heart to this man, only to be cast aside the moment his wealthy friends disapproved. The beautiful green dress hung in her closet, a cruel reminder of a fairy tale that had ended abruptly at midnight. Leo was confused. "Is Mr. Julian mad at us?" he asked, his lower lip trembling. "No, sweetheart," Elara said, her own voice thick with unshed tears. "He's just busy." But Leo knew. Children always knew. He retreated to his small table and began to draw. He drew for a long time, his brow furrowed in concentration. Later that day, Elara found the drawing on her pillow. It was simple, done in a child's unsteady hand. There were 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a small one. They were all holding hands. Over their heads, a bright yellow sun was smiling down on them. Underneath, Leo had painstakingly written his name. Looking at the simple, powerful image of what they had almost become, Elara's heartbreak turned into a quiet, determined resolve. She would not let it end like this, not in silence and misunderstanding. He deserved to see what he was throwing away. She folded the drawing carefully, put on her coat, and headed for the glass tower. One last time. Julian sat in his office, a ghost in his own life once more. The brief, vibrant interlude of warmth and laughter felt like a dream he had woken from. The grief was back, heavier than before, because now it was compounded by the fresh pain of his own cowardice. He had hurt them. He had seen the confusion and pain in Elara's eyes, and he had done nothing. He had let his fear win. He picked up the silver-framed photo of Sarah and Thomas from his desk. He looked at his wife's smiling face. She had been so full of life, so full of love. She had never been afraid to love. What would she think of him now, hiding in his fortress of grief, pushing away a chance at happiness because he was scared? "You have to live, Jules." He could almost hear her voice, a gentle echo in his memory. "You have to live enough for all of us." He realized, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that honoring her memory didn't mean entombing himself. It meant living. It meant allowing his heart, broken as it was, to feel again. Loving Elara and Leo didn't diminish his love for Sarah and Thomas. It was proof that the love they had shared had made him capable of loving again. It was an extension of their legacy, not a replacement. A profound sense of shame washed over him, followed by a surge of desperate urgency. He had to fix this. He grabbed his coat, ready to run to her, to fall on his knees and beg for her forgiveness. Just as he reached the door, his intercom buzzed. "Sir," his assistant's voice was hesitant. "There's a woman here to see you. An Elara. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's very insistent." His heart hammered against his ribs. "Send her up," he said, his voice choked with emotion. He didn't wait for her to come to his office. He met her at the elevator bay. She stood there, looking small and fragile in the vast, empty space. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with hurt, but her chin was held high. She didn't say a word. She simply held out the folded piece of paper. He took it from her, his fingers trembling slightly as he unfolded it. He saw the 3 stick figures: the man, the woman, the child, the smiling son, a family. The last of his defenses crumbled to dust. A sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped his lips. He closed the distance between them in a single step and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, the words a torrent of confession against her temple. "I'm so sorry, Elara. I was a fool. I was a coward." She was stiff in his arms for a moment, then she sagged against him, a shudder running through her as she finally let her own tears fall. "I was so scared," he continued, holding her tighter as if he could physically fuse them together and never let go. "Scared of losing someone again, scared it was a betrayal, but the only betrayal was what I did to you, to us." He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes, his own swimming with tears. "Please," he begged, "don't let me be that man. I don't want to be him anymore. I want to be the man in this picture, with you, with Leo." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I want this. I want our family." At that moment, the elevator doors chimed open. Mark Renshaw stepped out, his face a mask of surprise as he saw his CEO clinging to the woman from the party. Julian saw him. The old Julian would have pulled away, embarrassed and defensive, but he was not the old Julian. He straightened up, his arm firmly around Elara's waist, holding her to his side. He looked his board member dead in the eye, his voice clear and unwavering, ringing with a conviction that left no room for doubt. "Mark," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "I'd like you to properly meet Elara." He paused, then delivered the final, definitive statement. "This is my family." 1 year later, the air was filled with the scent of real pine and freshly baked gingerbread. Soft, instrumental carols played from a stereo, a gentle murmur in the background. The light in the room was warm, golden, coming from the fireplace and the twinkling lights of a real Christmas tree, adorned with a chaotic but beautiful mix of shimmering ornaments and Leo's handmade decorations. This was not Julian's cold penthouse. This was a home, a house with a yard that they had chosen together, a space filled not with expensive art and minimalist furniture, but with the comfortable clutter of a life being lived. Julian was on the floor, his suit jacket and tie long since discarded. He was on his hands and knees, concentrating fiercely as he connected a tricky piece of track for a new, even more elaborate train set. Leo knelt beside him, an equal partner in the engineering project, handing him pieces with the solemnity of a surgeon's assistant. "I think this one goes here, Jules," Leo said, pointing with a small finger. He called him Jules now. Julian looked at the track, then at the boy, and a wide, genuine smile spread across his face. "You're right, Chief. Perfect." He ruffled Leo's hair, and the boy beamed with pride. Elara sat on the plush sofa, a mug of tea cradled in her hands, watching them. A deep, quiet contentment settled over her, a feeling of safety and peace she had once thought unattainable. She wore a simple, cozy sweater, and on her left hand, a delicate ring with a single, elegant diamond sparkled in the firelight. The ghosts were still there. The memory of Sarah and Thomas was a gentle presence, not a haunting one. Their picture had a place of honor on the mantel, next to a new photo of the three of them, taken in a sun-drenched park just a few weeks ago. They were not a replacement family. They were a new family, built on the foundations of loss and resilience, cemented by the innocent wisdom of a child. Julian finished the track and connected the power. With a flick of a switch, the train whirred to life, its tiny headlight cutting a path through the dimming afternoon light as it began its journey around the tree. Leo let out a quiet gasp of pure joy. Julian sat back on his heels, his work complete. He didn't look at the train. He looked up at Elara. His eyes, once so full of shadows, were now clear and bright, filled with a love so profound it needed no words. He had been a man lost in a cold, silent world. She and her son had overheard his silent cry for help, just as he had overheard hers. They had found each other in a forgotten corridor, two broken souls and one small boy with a plastic dinosaur. He reached out a hand to her. She placed her mug down and took it, her fingers lacing with his. "We're home," he said, his voice soft but full of absolute certainty. She smiled, her own eyes shimmering with happy tears, and squeezed his hand. "Yes," she whispered, "we're home."